Once again, just a couple of days ago, actually just yesterday, the Associated Press, a major news feed and news agency providing articles and headlines to our mainstream press, is coming out with a headline like this: stunningly lenient sentence for former bin Laden driver. So please read a little bit behind the lines here, because what it implies essentially is that the sentence was too lenient, that something has gone wrong with the American justice system. Well, obviously EAP does get a few things right, but it is not exactly the way they're positing these events, which make these events an atrocity of justice. As the article states, a military jury gave Osama bin Laden's driver a stunningly lenient sentence on Thursday, making him eligible for release in just 5 months, despite the prosecutor's request for a sentence tough enough to frighten terrorists around the globe. In this entire article, there is absolutely no mention as what has been happening in Guantanamo Bay and to this particular person at all, because he has been held in solitary confinement basically for the last 6 years, mainly without access to lawyers, and now we have come down to kangaroo courts in the United States, which are no better than Stalin's courts in the Soviet Union were during their days. And even such a jury as this could not convict this person all the way, because evidently even some of the military officers on that jury panel had some sense of decency left not to convict this low-level employee, or whoever he was, of bin Laden's, into making him out to be some major terrorist threat towards the United States. There was, in contrast to this little AP story, which very much got out there, there was an article written by Paul Craig Roberts on the same day, and it basically called the entire trial into question. And of course, these are kangaroo courts. That is what they are. So Paul Craig Roberts says, now that military officers selected by the Bush Pentagon have reached a split verdict convicting Salim Hamdan, a one-time driver for Osama bin Laden, of supporting terrorism, but innocent of terrorist conspiracy, do you feel safe? The Bush regime, with its comic huffings and puffings, is unaware that it has made itself the laughingstock of the world, a comedy version of the Third Reich. I tend to disagree a little bit with Roberts here, because it's not exactly a comedy version. It's progressing quite nicely. Hamdan was not defended by slick lawyers that got O.J. Simpson off, and actually, one of those O.J. Simpson lawyers was Alan Dershowitz, and Alan Dershowitz is the name, and you should look this guy up, because he is very much involved with the Israeli lobby, AIPAC, and so on. In my opinion, a completely despicable guy, because he twists and turns words around to basically foster his own interests, and not exactly the people whom he's even defending in criminal trials. But Hamdan was certainly not being presented to a jury of his peers. Hamdan was defended by a Pentagon-appointed U.S. Navy officer and his jurors were all Pentagon-appointed U.S. military officers with an eye on their careers. But even in this kangaroo court, Hamdan was cleared of the main charges. And then this article from the AP goes on to say, basically, it remains unclear what will happen to Hamdan once his sentence is served, since the U.S. military has now said it won't release anyone who is still representing a threat. So evidently this little kangaroo court wasn't enough either. As Paul Roberts here in his article continues to point out, do you think we should feel safer with kangaroo court trials, the likes of Stalin in Soviet Russia, going on here, and then for the rest of the world to take us seriously anymore? Bush's multi-year, multi-billion-dollar war on terror has been reduced to railroading a few low-level employees, a driver, for Christ's sake. What's next? Convicting his dentist? So, then of course, the entire hypocrisy with Bush now making these grand big speeches in front of, before the Olympics in China, chiding China for their human rights abuses. If this isn't hypocrisy, I don't know what is. Here we have basically a regime here in the United States approving of torture, illegal renditions, and trashing the entire U.S. Constitution, and then chiding another nation for these very same shortcomings in their own country. It's simply laughable at this point. The world should be laughing at our leadership. But it gets worse, because if at some point there needs to be some understanding for us, the American people here, that things cannot continue in this vein, because we basically, through our complacency, not some of us, but most of us, have allowed this to happen. And so there is a question of collective guilt at this point. Just like back in Nazi Germany, people were bamboozled by very charismatic characters during that time, and they came to find out later and felt sorry for it, that they didn't understand it earlier. But at this point, even some of the major news out there, which are reporting the wrongdoings of this administration, there's essentially no excuse anymore for the ordinary citizen not to become involved in seeking justice and bringing this regime, this criminal regime which we have here in the United States, to justice, one way or the other. So, to say that China is abusing human rights, which is true, is one thing, but to absolve ourselves and our own government from that very responsibility is basically a joke. And so all of us have to do whatever we can, not only to not vote for McCain, essentially the successor for this regime, but to oppose any incoming regime which is promoting these same types of policies. Thanks for listening. We have a lot of work to do.